Welcome to the Introduction to NetAdvantage for SharePoint. This is Tom Puglisi, Technical Evangelist here in Infragistics, and after this demonstration you will understand what NetAdvantage for SharePoint is all about and who the users of this product will be and who installs it and so forth. And then you can watch the subsequent videos that actually show you how to interact with, configure, and add the web parts to your SharePoint web pages. And this is a good video to get a primer to understand what this product is all about. So the biggest question is, what is NetAdvantage for SharePoint? Essentially, NetAdvantage for SharePoint gives you additional web parts for your SharePoint server so that people that have permissions to edit and modify the pages within their scope can choose the Infragistics SharePoint web parts that are added to the library, to the SharePoint web part gallery. And as you guessed it, Infragistics made these SharePoint web parts using various controls and components from the Silverlight control libraries, specifically focusing a little bit more in the first release on data visualization controls. Other types of controls will be slated for the future, but for now you could say that most of the data visualization controls are the ones that are wrapped up into SharePoint web parts. So the other good thing about what is NetAdvantage for SharePoint, it's a way for you to create dashboards and data visualization based views that use very easy to interact with designers. So as a developer, you have to write code, you have to set properties, handle events, and all that stuff. However, these same controls wrapped up as SharePoint web parts are designed so that end users like ourselves that use SharePoint to build a quick application can easily whip up a page that has a chart or a map or several other types of controls in the web parts and go through the easy to use and interact with designer that allows you to set properties, hook it up to SharePoint list data or any other types of data, and get up and running really fast. And again, this is consumed by anyone or any user that has access to editing various types of SharePoint web pages. So it depends on the scope of the user. Like for example, I'll have access to various pages within our corporate SharePoint sites, but I don't have access to absolutely every site. So wherever I do have access to and have the ability to add web parts, that's where I can add and modify the Infragistics SharePoint web parts. Same thing with you guys and girls out there that have access to the various sites. Now here's a typical SharePoint website page that is in edit mode, and this is what it looks like when you're able to insert a web part into your page. So you're able to kind of go through a list of SharePoint web parts in this gallery here that I have highlighted in red. And these are some of the default or built-in SharePoint web parts. I also see here that in this example there's a couple of additional ones that were added, like some free ones that might be out there. Some examples or experiments that people have been trying by adding web parts here in this sample website that we have here. But after NetAdvantage is installed, you get an Infragistics library of SharePoint web parts, and these are the ones that start off with the first release of this product. So NetAdvantage for SharePoint pretty much gives you rich DV-based web parts that you can use in your SharePoint sites to add quick dashboard, to quickly come up with some really compelling Silverlight based charts and graphs. The map control is really awesome as well. You're able to hook up to a live tile source. OpenStreet is one of them, and that one's free, and you don't even need a key to activate that. You just throw the web part onto the form and you hook it up and you set a property to hook up to OpenStreet, and it immediately starts streaming the tile source from their service for free. And then what you could do is you could just imagine having a SharePoint list with latitude and longitude columns, as well as some other 2 or 3 other columns that give you maybe a key or a string name for whatever it is that you're tracking on a map, then a value, and then some other types of data. You could actually have pins of data. So just some of the ideas of what I'm giving you of what you can do with this product right now. The other cool thing that NetAdvantage for SharePoint gives you is that it extends the in-box history or the source control version history of documents. So whenever you check stuff in and out, you can review like the changes that were made by the various users. Well, Infragistics has basically extended that functionality so that when you select an item that has a version control history of changes in activity, you can choose to allow the Infragistics data visualization timeline view to provide the view for you to see the history in a nice timeline view. And again, these are things that I'll show you quickly in this video, and then you could go a little deeper in subsequent videos. So here's some pictures of NetAdvantage for SharePoint web parts. Here we have the content rotator, which is at the top left hand of the screen with some images that flip through. Then we have the gauge web part where you have gauge control that can be fully configured. Then underneath that we have the map control, and you could set the starting point of where it will initially load very easily. And then you have the various chart types, and that's not all of them. There are additional chart types in addition to just these 4 charts that are here. The document version history timeline looks just like this. So in this example, I've selected a document that, if you could see in the grayed out area behind this dialog, and then I clicked on the ribbon control. We sneak in another button that allows you to click on that, and then it pops up this timeline view. And it's very interactive. It's Silverlight based, very interactive, no full page postbacks. That's another benefit of why the NetAdvantage Silverlight controls are great for web parts, because they don't basically post the whole page back. The entire interactions and connectivity is between the Silverlight components and the back end as well. So one of the biggest things when going into a new product or not really knowing much about a product and getting an introduction is, how does all this stuff work? It's scary sometimes when we don't know, but it's actually very easy. So the installation is typically performed by whoever the SharePoint administrator is, or whoever is the designated go-to person for installing web parts, or maintaining the SharePoint server, performing tune-ups and whatever it is that they do on their SharePoint server. That person will be the one installing the NetAdvantage for SharePoint products, and it's installed on the SharePoint server. And now, who uses this product? Basically, as I was saying before, any end user that wants to create web applications or a simple application using the abilities of SharePoint to quickly whip up something that has a lot of functionality without having to write code. So I'm a developer, but I'm also a SharePoint user, because I'm not going to go and create a full-blown application for everything that I need. SharePoint handles lots of my application needs, like for some workflows and for document storage and some light processing. Just create a SharePoint website that has all the stuff that you need. Create some list data sources where the data can come from various sources, and then use NetAdvantage for SharePoint web parts to visualize that data. So as a matter of fact, configuring and adding these SharePoint web parts to your page is very easy. And I want to be honest with you, when I started playing with these web parts, I kind of tend to see if I could play with the controls before I look at any kind of documentation, and then if I run into problems, then I start looking for help. But I really didn't look for any help at all. I just started adding SharePoint web parts, and I just started right-clicking and firing up the designers and experimenting, and it's pretty quick and easy. So here's an example of one of the intuitive designers for the map control. You essentially right-click on the control while the page is still in edit mode, and you click on the design menu item that appears when you right-click on the component, and you just have various options here. So in this map designer, for example, you just check the things that you want on or off. You specify whether you want the navigation pane showing. You could also drag the map around and zoom in and out using the keyboard. And when you land on an area that is of interest, I just basically zoomed in on the town that I live in, and I just click that big button that says use current location as start, and that's where the map will start whenever the page loads. So again, very easy. You could also click on the layers tab that's up there, and then what that does, it brings up another panel where you can assign a data source, and you can map the columns of the data source to the required columns or the required fields that are required to show pins on the various points of the map. That would be latitude, longitude, then there's a couple of others that like give you a value, and then a string for like the label and things of that nature. So you could do stuff like that as well with this map. Here's another intuitive designer for the gauge control. Again, you right click on the gauge when you throw it onto the form, when you throw the web part onto the form, and then you just invoke this editor, and then you just start clicking on the various elements that are before your eyes. Like for example, you don't even need to know what the names of these elements are. Like, is it a needle, is it a button, is it a label? Who cares? Just click on the labels and on the needles and whatever it is you want to configure. It becomes highlighted, and then the properties for that element become visible in the right hand side. And notice, for example, you could set a range, the start and end extent. That means where it will start drawing and where it will end drawing, where it will end its drawing. Then you could set a data source for the needle. You could hard code a value, or you could assign it to an actual list or any other SharePoint data source. Then you could just keep modifying by adding more scales, adding more needles, and so forth. Alright, so at this time I will show you a demo of how this works. So here we have a SharePoint website, and I went into edit mode so I could now insert Infragistics web parts. So notice here I could scroll through the gallery and I could click on Infragistics, and these are the various web parts that I can add. So let's start off by adding a map part. So I click on that and click add, and it will throw it onto the form here. And the map has now been added. And what I could do is right click and invoke the designer. By invoking the designer, I could now configure the map by easily moving around here. So let's say if I click on the map and drag it around. So right now this is currently set up so that the tile source for this is OpenStreetMaps. I can also use CloudMade or Bing. However, if I go to those guys, I'm going to need a key, like a key that. So in other words, if you want to use Bing or CloudMade, you have to have an account and you have to be able to get a key from them. They'll usually email you a key and whatever terms and services. But OpenStreetMaps is free, and you don't even need a key. It just hooks directly up with their service and starts streaming. And that's what's going on right at this moment too. Even in the preview, I'm getting maps from OpenStreetMaps. So let's say, for example, I wanted to zoom in on one area. I could just use the keyboard here, page up, and I could just keep zooming in until I reach an area that I just want to start off at. And again, the detail starts getting really nice as I get closer and closer. I just want to go to like a really busy area. I don't even know where this part is, but I figure I'd just go there. So let's say if I wanted to start off right here, I could just go to this button here in the General tab and click on Use Current Location as Start. And by doing that, that's where the map will start. And right now, if you go to Layers, I could say, give me a new pin layer. And what this allows me to do is navigate to a data source. I kind of don't have a data source right now. I'll probably do it in a later video, but just to give you an idea of how this works, this data source dialog that we created will show up whenever it's time for you to assign a data source to any one of our web parts that require data. So you notice here we have required longitude and latitude. So if you hook up to one of these lists, so this doesn't make sense, but I'll just show you. This is a data source that I have for another example. But you're going to have columns in your SharePoint lists or any other lists that are in SharePoint. And what you basically want to do is map one of these columns, and you do this by dragging and dropping. So that's that, and that one is hooked up to this one here. So that's basically how you map columns. And then you could even, this doesn't really make sense over this type of column, but just so you know that we also have aggregate based functions that you can apply over the fields that are mapped to our control. So you could do a lot of fancy stuff, like it'll result in grouping and so forth. But again, just to give you an idea, these are the various ways that you can actually grab data. And this is even more powerful. So let's say if you have a list with a bunch of views, imagine you have a filtered view. Let's say offices that are, I don't know, that are like in a certain region. You choose that view, and then just that data will come up because it's filtered according to how you designed it in SharePoint. So again, I could really go on and on about this, and it's really awesome. I'm very excited to play with this, but just to show you some ideas of how this works. So then you click on apply, OK, then you close it out, and let's say if I jump back into, say if I exit out of edit mode and I save it and close it, this is basically what happens. And then the map starts off on that page, then I'm able to interact with it. I could zoom in and out using this interactive tool here, center everything, load the whole map in view, then just keep playing around with it. So again, this is just a simple example with the map. Works really well. Let's say if I jump back into edit mode and I want to insert another web part here. Let's go to web part and we click on Infragistics, and then we go to, let's do, how about we do the chart part here, and we will add that, and once it loads up, here's the chart part. It's going to tell me that it's not configured, so please configure it. So right click, go to design, we have the chart editor. Now there are no series defined, and what we need to do is add a series. So we start off here. Which one? Let's do the financial one. This is pretty cool. I like the financial charts. And I just basically grabbed some data and threw it into a list here. But let's say if I okay, so let's see. Let's do this one here. Let's do the open, goes down there. The high goes here. Scroll down a little, the low goes here. Close, basic typical stuff, and then the volume down here. Some of these aren't even required, but let's grab this one, volume. Throw it down there. And what else? Let's click OK. That hooks up the data that I need. These are some default stuff, some default items here. So that's basically how I hooked up the data to that one series. I could set a title there if I like. A couple of other things. I could set the width and height. I could allow zooming. So if I do that, if I do this here, I could set another axis as well, but I'm going to cancel that. A couple of axes here. So again, I could do various things here. I could set min and max, major color, label settings. I could, let's say if I set these labels up, like I put an angle on it. Let's do like 45 degrees. Click on OK. Then we have the legend. We could show the legend. So here's the legend, and this is not shown. So just hide it just to show you how it's shown or hidden. And then we click on apply and OK, and then we close it. And we save the page, and let's load that page up. And this is basically what it looks like. And again, I didn't set the size on here, so everything's really crunched down. So I'd have to, do a little bit more configuring. But you could zoom in and out by using, keyboard up and down. But again, I could do all this. I could set the size of the web part so it's much larger, because right now it's kind of tiny. But again, just to give you an idea of how all this works. So if I go back to the demo, so at this point, you should have a good understanding, which I could summarize now, what NetAdvantage for SharePoint is. So you get some web parts in your SharePoint web part gallery that include the map. Then you get some gauges such as the radial and linear gauge. I only showed you like a picture of the radial, but there's also a linear gauge where it's like a thermometer that's oriented vertically or horizontally. You get a content rotator, which you can rotate pics or text. So if you have a picture, like if you have a repository of pictures in SharePoint, you can rotate those pictures, as well as a list of items that have text in that. You can rotate that as well. And you get a chart with with an entire set of chart types, such as the versions of line, spline, and area types of charts for line, columns, step series, financial series, waterfall series. All those charts you get as well. And then you also get a document history timeline view that extends the version control history view from SharePoint, the one that comes with it intrinsically. So you have a really rich document history timeline view that shows all the activity in an interactive way. So, thanks for watching.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.